What if I told you that one of the biggest rivalries on Earth between the United States and Iran didn't start with religion, or terrorism, or even nukes? It started with oil, with power, with secrets, and with a quiet handshake in the shadows that changed the fate of millions. This is not just a story about two nations. This is about spies, betrayal, revolution, and the making of a modern enemy. Welcome to PsyOps Uncovered, where we reveal the dark psychology behind real-world power plays. Don't just watch history, decode it. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button if you're hungry for hidden truths, psychological warfare, and forbidden history. Let's go back to where it all began. In late 1800s to early 1900s, Iran, also known as Persia back then, was a land of rich history and ancient empires. For thousands of years, it had stood as a cultural giant, with powerful dynasties and poetic legends. But by the late 1800s, Iran had fallen behind the rapidly modernizing Western world. Foreign powers saw Iran as a soft target, especially the British and the Russians. Here's a curiosity trigger for you. What happens when a proud but struggling country sits on one of the largest oil reserves in the world and can't defend it? That's exactly what happened to Iran. A land rich in oil, but poor in power. In 1908, a British company discovered oil in Iran, massive oil. That company became the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, later known as BP. But guess what? The Iranian people barely saw any of that oil money. The profits mostly went to Britain. Iran got crumbs. While the West built factories and war machines with Iranian oil, Iran itself had dirt roads, poor schools, and almost no healthcare. Ask yourself this. How long can a nation stay quiet when it's being robbed in plain sight? Between 1940s to 1950s. During World War II, Iran found itself trapped between superpowers again. The British and Soviets invaded Iran to control its oil and supply lines. The US entered the scene not as a conqueror, but as a friend, or so it seemed. Iran's young Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, came to power in the middle of all this. He looked west, dressed west, and thought modernization was the key to Iran's future. He was the perfect ally for America's Cold War goals. But there was one problem. The Iranian people didn't trust him. They saw him as a rich boy installed by foreign powers. Meanwhile, a new voice was rising in Iran, a voice that would shake the world. From 1951 to 1953, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh, a humble, educated man, became Iran's elected prime minister in 1951. He wasn't against the West, he just wanted fairness. He stood before the world and said, Iran's oil belongs to Iran. He nationalized the oil industry, kicking out the British company that had been draining Iran for decades. To the Iranian people, Mossadegh was a hero. To Britain and America, he was a threat. Why? Because if Iran could nationalize its oil, what would stop other countries from doing the same? Here's where the game changed forever. If you're fascinated by secret coups and psychological manipulation in global politics, hit that like button and subscribe to PsyOps Uncovered. We're just getting started. In 1953, behind closed doors, the CIA and Britain's MI6 crafted a secret mission, Operation Ajax. The goal? Remove Mossadegh, put the Shah back in full power, keep control over Iran's oil. They used fake news, paid protesters, and political bribes. They spread rumors that Mossadegh was a communist, even though he wasn't. On August 19, 1953, Mossadegh was overthrown. The Shah returned to power, this time backed directly by US intelligence. America called it a win. But for Iranians, it was the ultimate betrayal. Let's pause for a moment. How would you feel if a foreign country removed your elected leader just to keep control of your resources? This moment planted the first deep seed of hatred between Iran and America. Comment below, was the CIA right to stop Mossadegh, or did they create their own enemy? Between 1953 to 1979, back on the throne, the Shah ruled with a golden fist. He launched massive reforms to modernize Iran. Western dress codes, modern schools, women's rights, nuclear energy with US help. But behind the progress was a growing darkness. The secret police, Savak. The Shah created Savak, a brutal security force trained by the CIA and Mossad, Israel's intelligence. Savak did one thing well: silence dissent. Thousands of Iranians were tortured, jailed, or disappeared. People were afraid to speak in public. Even family members reported on each other. The country looked modern on the outside, but it was full of fear on the inside. America kept supporting the Shah with billions in aid and weapons. Why? Because he was seen as a wall against Soviet influence in the region. But this created a ticking time bomb. The more America supported the Shah, the more Iranians saw the US as part of the problem. Ask yourself, can you modernize a country by force and expect love in return. Between 1960s and 1979, while the Shah smiled in photo ops with American presidents, a new enemy was rising from exile: Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. He was a religious scholar who preached that the Shah was corrupt, America was evil, Islam must guide Iran, not the West. He was exiled in 1964, but his speeches, tapes, and writings were smuggled into Iran. Young people, clerics, and even the poor began to see him as the voice of truth. By the late 1970s, protests erupted across Iran. The Shah grew weaker by the day. The world watched in shock. In 1979, the revolution reached its climax. In 1979, mass protests, burning flags, soldiers refusing to fire on crowds. The Shah tried to hold on, but it was too late. He fled Iran. Khomeini returned. Millions welcomed him like a savior. Iran became an Islamic republic, led by religious scholars. The monarchy was gone. The West was out. And then came the moment that would burn the US-Iran relationship to the ground. If this history is blowing your mind, imagine what's still ahead. Nuclear secrets, hidden wars, and assassination plots. Hit subscribe to PsyOps Uncovered and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss part 2. Question for you. Do you think Iran's revolution was inevitable? Could the US have stopped it, or did they cause it? By 1979, Iran had flipped the global chessboard. The Shah, America's trusted friend, was gone. Ayatollah Khomeini was now in charge. And for the first time in modern history, a country had turned an Islamic revolution into a full-blown government. But America wasn't just watching from the sidelines. It was about to get caught in the flames. On November 4th, 1979, a crowd of angry Iranian students stormed the US Embassy in Tehran. They climbed over the walls, broke through doors, and took 52 American diplomats hostage. Their demand? Return the Shah to Iran to face trial. But the Shah was in the US, receiving cancer treatment. America refused to hand him over. The students didn't back down. They tied up diplomats, blindfolded them, and dragged them through the streets. What followed was 444 days of terror, humiliation, and global tension. Think about this. Would you trust a country that held your people hostage for over a year? Every night, Americans turned on their TVs and saw images of their citizens tied to chairs in a foreign land. News anchors ended broadcasts by saying, Day 187, Day 243, Day 300. This wasn't just political, it was emotional. People cried, people got angry, people changed. Suddenly, Iran was not just a country on the map, it was the enemy. If your country's citizens were being held hostage for over a year, how would you respond? Diplomacy or force? President Jimmy Carter tried to negotiate, but failed. Then came a secret rescue mission, Operation Eagle Claw. It ended in disaster. Helicopters crashed in the desert. 8 US soldiers died without even reaching the embassy. It was a public failure, and it helped Ronald Reagan win the next election. When Reagan took office in 1981, the hostages were finally released, minutes after he was sworn in. Coincidence? Or a message?
If you're starting to see the layers of betrayal and psychology in this conflict, hit that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe to PsyOps Uncovered. We're only halfway down the rabbit hole.
Between 1980 to 1988, in 1980, just 1 year after the hostage crisis began, Iran faced another nightmare. Iraq, led by dictator Saddam Hussein, invaded Iran. He thought Iran was weak after the revolution. He wanted to take land and crush the Islamic regime. Guess who quietly helped Saddam? That's right, the United States. Even though Saddam was a brutal dictator, the US saw him as the lesser evil. They feared Iran's Islamic revolution would spread across the Middle East. America gave Iraq satellite images, military intel, dual-use technology, billions in trade credit. They even looked the other way when Iraq used chemical weapons against Iranian soldiers and even civilians. Imagine fighting in a trench and suddenly choking on toxic gas. Your skin burns, your lungs collapse, and the world does nothing. Iran lost hundreds of thousands of lives, yet it kept fighting. By 1988, the war ended in a draw, but Iran was furious, with Iraq and with America. In Iran's eyes, the US had now done 3 things. 1. Removed their elected leader. 2. Supported a cruel Shah. 3. Backed their enemy in a brutal war. This was no longer politics, it was personal. From 1985 to 1987. Now here's where it gets strange. While publicly supporting Iraq in the war, the Reagan administration secretly sold weapons to Iran, the same Iran they had labeled a terrorist state. Why? To free American hostages in Lebanon and to fund rebels in Nicaragua fighting a communist government. This became the infamous Iran-Contra affair. The US did 3 illegal things at once: sold arms to a hostile regime, lied to Congress, funded a war in another country using dirty money. When the truth came out, America was shocked. It proved what many in the world already believed. The US didn't have friends. It had interests. I want to ask, does a country lose moral high ground if it breaks its own laws to protect its power? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Between 1990s to 2010s, after surviving war and betrayal, Iran doubled down on its independence. One key move, building a nuclear program. Iran said it was for energy. The US said it was for bombs. The US and its allies began imposing sanctions, tight rules that choked Iran's economy. No trading in dollars, no international banking access, no oil sales to certain countries. Iran's economy suffered, but the nuclear program kept going. Some believed Iran was bluffing, others believed it was just a few years away from building a bomb. The world held its breath. If you're seeing how every action creates a new enemy, drop a hat emoji in the comments. And if you're hungry for more deep dives into forbidden history, subscribe to PsyOps Uncovered. This channel exposes the manipulations they don't teach in school. Between 2015 and 2018, in a surprise twist, President Barack Obama signed a major deal with Iran, along with other world powers. It was called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. Here's what the deal said. Iran would limit its nuclear program, allow strict inspections. In return, sanctions would be lifted. For the first time in decades, there was hope. Iranians celebrated in the streets. Foreign businesses started to return. It seemed like peace was possible, but not everyone liked the deal. President Trump hated it. Israel hated it. Even some American lawmakers thought it was too soft. From 2018-2020. In 2018, President Donald Trump pulled the US out of the nuclear deal. He said it was one of the worst deals ever made. He reimposed harsh sanctions, crippling Iran's economy. He called it maximum pressure. Iran, in return, restarted parts of its nuclear program. Hope turned into hostility again. Cyber attacks, oil tanker sabotage, and regional tensions skyrocketed. In January 2020, the U.S. accused General Qasem Soleimani, Iran's top military commander, of planning attacks on American personnel. So in January 2020, a U.S. drone strike killed him near Baghdad airport in Iraq. It was a bold move. Iran promised severe revenge, and days later, it fired missiles at U.S. bases in Iraq. Tensions were at an all-time high. Some feared this would spark a full-scale war, but both sides pulled back, barely. Still, something had changed. Iran no longer saw America as just an enemy. They saw it as an assassin, and America saw Iran as a ticking bomb. The battlefield has changed. It's no longer just missiles, armies, and oil. Now it's viruses, invisible ones, not inside your body, but inside your systems. After Soleimani's death and the collapse of the nuclear deal, the conflict between the US and Iran entered a new era. Since 2010's present, you don't need bullets to destroy a nation anymore, just code. Both the United States and Iran have been silently waging war in cyberspace, and you probably didn't hear about most of it. In 2010, Iran's nuclear facilities mysteriously started breaking down. Centrifuges were spinning out of control and self-destructing. It wasn't a glitch, it was a cyber attack, a highly sophisticated virus called Stuxnet, created by the US and Israel. It was the first virus ever built to physically destroy machines. Iran was furious, but impressed. They learned, they adapted, they built their own cyber army. Iran has since launched multiple cyber attacks on US banks, on Saudi oil companies, on water systems and power grids in Israel, even disinformation campaigns on social media. The line between war and peace has become blurred. The battlefield is now your phone, your power supply, and your mind. Would you even know if your country was under cyber attack? What if it already is? Drop your thoughts below. If you're learning something they never taught in school, smash that like button. And if digital warfare gives you chills, don't just watch. Subscribe to PsyOps Uncovered. We uncover the wars you can't see. From 2010's present, you don't need to launch a war to eliminate a threat. Sometimes one bullet can do more than 1,000 bombs. That's been the approach in this secret war. Since 2010, multiple Iranian nuclear scientists have been assassinated. One was killed by a motorcycle bomb. Another was gunned down in traffic. Others vanished. Iran blamed Israel and the US. In 2020, the most senior nuclear scientist, Mossadegh CIA, was killed near Tehran. Reports say a satellite-controlled machine gun fired at him using AI and facial recognition. No soldiers, no boots on the ground, just cold, precise elimination. Ask yourself, if your brightest minds were being targeted, would you ever forgive? Iran hasn't just sat back. It funds, arms, and trains proxy groups across the Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthi rebels in Yemen, militias in Iraq and Syria. These groups have launched attacks on American bases, allies, oil tankers, and embassies. Both sides deny direct warfare, yet both are actively fighting. This is asymmetrical warfare. One side strikes in silence, the other retaliates with denial. No declarations, no surrender, just a loop of quiet violence. In war, truth is the first casualty. What people believe shapes what they support. And in the US-Iran conflict, narratives are as powerful as weapons. For decades, American media has painted Iran as the world's top sponsor of terrorism, anti-democracy, anti-women, obsessed with nukes, fueled by religious extremism. There's some truth, but also deep exaggeration. It creates fear, it justifies sanctions, it keeps people from asking deeper questions. In Iran, state-controlled media has its own story. America is an imperialist bully. It exploits weak countries, it backs dictators, kills scientists, and spreads immorality. It will never allow a truly independent Middle East. And again, there's some truth. Both nations use propaganda to create public support for long-term hostility. Think about this. Would Americans still support sanctions if they saw how they affect ordinary Iranian families? Would Iranians still support death to America if they sat down with US veterans? The truth is complex. Right now, the US and Iran are still enemies, but not at war. They talk sometimes. They threaten often. They spy constantly. Recent developments. Iran is enriching uranium again. The US has military bases near Iran's borders. Israel continues covert ops. Sanctions are still hurting Iran's economy. Protests inside Iran are growing, especially among women and youth. New diplomatic attempts are quietly in motion, but constantly collapse. It's a dangerous dance. Too many moving parts. Too many hidden agendas. This isn't just about Iran or America. It's about how power plays out across borders. If you're still with us, drop a ta emoji and subscribe to PsyOps Uncovered. We decode power, fear, and manipulation, one dark chapter at a time. Let's zoom out. This rivalry is not just about weapons or territory, it's about control over the mind. US PsyOps tactics, sanctions to cause desperation and internal rebellion, cyber attacks to sow distrust in Iranian systems, propaganda to isolate Iran from the world, supporting protests covertly to trigger regime change. Iran's psychological moves, demonizing America to unify citizens, positioning itself as the true Islamic leader, inspiring anti-Western sentiment across the Muslim world, using religious symbolism to mask strategic goals. Both sides know the war for public opinion is as important as the war on the battlefield. You win by convincing the world you're the victim, even while you pull the trigger. Are we watching a war of nations or a war for our minds? The million-dollar question. Can the US and Iran ever stop being enemies? History says yes, but it won't be easy. Here's what would need to happen. Iran must stop supporting armed groups and give full nuclear transparency. The US must stop regime change operations and acknowledge past interference. Both must see each other as nations of people, not just threats. Most importantly, both sides must be willing to forgive. But forgiveness is hard when the wounds are still bleeding. Do you believe in second chances between nations, or are some betrayals too deep to forget? Tell us in the comments. Let's strip everything down. The United States and Iran didn't become enemies overnight. It took a stolen democracy, a brutal revolution, a hostage crisis, secret wars, broken deals, and decades of lies. It's a story of fear dressed as strategy, of power disguised as morality, of enemies who might have once been allies, if not for a few decisions made in smoke-filled rooms. But remember, history isn't fixed. It's written by those who stay curious. If you've made it this far, you're not just a viewer, you're a seeker. It's easy to think that nations fight over weapons, borders, or leaders, but the real battle, it's often for identity. And no rivalry proves this better than the one between Iran and the United States. Because beyond oil, nukes, and secret wars lies a deeper conflict. The war between who we are and who we fear becoming. Iran isn't just fighting America, it's fighting within itself. Since the 1979 revolution, Iran has struggled to balance traditional Islamic values versus global modernity, religious leadership versus popular will, national pride versus international isolation. Iran has one of the youngest populations in the Middle East, and they're online. They watch Western shows, listen to American music, and follow global trends. Many young Iranians want freedom of expression, women's rights, and openness to the world. But their government often cracks down hard. Protests like the Woman, Life, Freedom movement in 2022 proved that the younger generation is ready to challenge the system. Still, the government uses one excuse: we must protect ourselves from Western influence. Here's a question for you. Can you build a free future by fearing the outside world? If you're seeing the deeper psychology behind global conflict, take a second to like this video. And for more powerful breakdowns like this, subscribe to PsyOps Uncovered, the place where history, psychology, and secrets collide. Post-World War II to present, Iran isn't the only nation with a story like this. In fact, once you recognize the pattern, you'll see it everywhere. Iraq. Saddam Hussein was once supported by the US. Later, he was called a threat and overthrown. Chaos followed. Cuba. The US once backed Batista, a dictator. When Fidel Castro overthrew him, America tried to assassinate assassinate Castro multiple times and impose decades of sanctions. Cuba became isolated and angry. Venezuela. The US supported opposition groups, sanctions, and even coups to remove socialist leaders like Hugo Chavez and Nicolás Maduro. The result? Poverty, collapse, and more hostility. The pattern is clear. Support a regime, lose control, sanction it, demonize it, repeat. Ask yourself, does this sound like spreading democracy or managing obedience? Let's go even deeper. Why do countries need enemies? Here's a hidden truth most people miss. Enemies are useful. They justify military budgets, rally citizens around leaders, distract from internal problems, strengthen national identity. Both America and Iran have used this tactic. In the US, we must stop Iran from getting a nuke. We must defend Israel. They hate our freedom. These phrases keep fear high and budgets higher. In Iran, America wants to destroy Islam. The West spreads corruption. We must defend our honor. These lines keep the revolutionary government in power. Ask yourself honestly, how much of what you know about the enemy comes from direct experience, and how much comes from media or school? Let's do a quick thought experiment. What if the US never removed Mossadegh in 1953? The Shah had shared power with the people. The 1979 revolution had allowed fair elections. America had apologized for its past and negotiated in good faith. Could Iran and the US have been allies today, like Turkey or even India? Could we have avoided 8 years of war, 52 hostages, economic suffering, the rise of extremist groups, years of nuclear standoffs? History doesn't allow do-overs, but examining what-ifs reveals just how fragile peace can be. If these thought experiments open your eyes, drop a ta emoji in the comments. And for more world-altering what-if scenarios, subscribe to PsyOps Uncovered. We connect the dots they don't want you to see. Despite 40-plus years of conflict, many American politicians still treat Iran like a cartoon villain. But Iran is not one thing. It's 80-plus million people, a complex political system with conservatives, reformists, and moderates, ancient culture, massive economic potential, and, despite what you may think, many citizens who like American people, not necessarily American policy. The problem? Foreign policy often lacks empathy. Without empathy, diplomacy becomes impossible. You can't talk to someone you've already labeled evil. Real power comes from understanding your enemy, not just bombing them. Iran also traps itself in old thinking. By constantly shouting death to America, it pushes away opportunities for change. The government uses the US as a scapegoat for domestic failure, jails critics as Western agents, blocks social media while using it for propaganda, shuts out global investors who could rebuild the economy. This limits progress. It deepens isolation, and it hurts ordinary Iranians the most. Iran's government says it wants respect, but respect isn't demanded, it's earned through reform, not fear. Here's what we're left with. Two powerful nations, both proud, both wounded, both watching each other through binoculars, waiting for the other to blink. But here's the reality. Iran won't disappear. America won't either. Neither side can win through force. So the only real option? Talk, listen, understand. The question is, who will go first? This isn't just about Iran and the US, it's about how empires rise and fall, how nations project strength and hide fear, how propaganda becomes policy, and how the same patterns overthrow, support, sanction, demonize, repeat over and over again. But most of all, this story shows us how easy it is to make an enemy and how hard it is to make peace. So here's your challenge as a viewer. Don't just choose a side, choose to stay curious. That's how we break the cycle. PsyOps Uncovered exists for one reason, to help you see the war behind the war. Because once you understand the mind games, you'll never fall for them again. The US-Iran rivalry is more than just history. It's a blueprint. And now, you know how to read it. If this deep dive changed the way you see global power, hit like, leave a comment, tell us what shocked you the most, turn on notifications, and subscribe to PsyOps Uncovered, where dark history meets deep psychology. Because knowledge isn't just power, it's protection. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, stay free.